The ring was a size 6, plain gold, with a small inscription on the inside that her husband had chosen. 3 words she had not let herself read since the morning he drove away with his second phone and a duffel bag full of everything he thought she owed him. She had carried it in the front pocket of her jeans for 11 days before she finally walked into Clearview Pawn on Haverford Avenue, because 11 days was how long it took to run out of other ideas. Her name was Dana Carroll, 31 years old, overnight shift at a hospital laundry facility, 3 children who needed to eat every single day, whether or not the refrigerator cooperated. Mia was 9, Marcus was 7, and little Cora had just turned 4. 3 kids, 1 income, and a man who had left behind nothing except the mortgage she could no longer cover and a last name she no longer wanted. She'd not eaten a full meal herself in 4 days. She told herself she was not hungry, and on the 4th day she stopped being able to tell the difference. She had no way of knowing that the man behind the glass at Clearview Pawn would recognize her face. She had no way of knowing what that recognition would eventually cost him, or what it would eventually give her. All she knew, standing on that sidewalk in a November wind with the cold coming through the lining of her coat, was that the ring in her pocket was the last thing she had left to sell, and her children needed groceries, and the choice had already made itself. Think about what it takes to walk into a place like that, knowing what you are leaving behind. If you have ever held something and known it was the last of something, leave a comment below, because what Dina did next took a kind of courage that doesn't have a name. She went in. The man at the counter was named Raymond Cole, 52 years old, owner of Clearview Pawn and 3 other locations across the city. A man who had spent his entire adult life looking at things people brought in when they had run out of road. He had seen wedding rings before. He had seen hundreds of them across 26 years of this business, set down on his glass counter by people whose marriages had ended or whose landlords had not. He had a system for appraising them that took about 45 seconds and left no room for sentiment. He was good at his job precisely because he did not let sentiment in the door. But when Dina walked through his door that Tuesday morning and set her ring on the counter, Raymond looked up from the ring and looked at her face, and something moved behind his eyes that he could not immediately account for. He knew that face. He had known it for 22 years. He just did not know how he knew it yet. Dina did not notice. She was watching the ring, not the man appraising it. She had the children's grocery list running in her head, the way it always ran. Milk, bread, peanut butter, apples, those little cartons of juice Marcus liked, the rice that stretched the furthest and fed everyone without argument. She was doing the math the way she had been doing it every day for 8 months, since the day her husband walked out, the way a woman learns to do math when the math is the only thing standing between her children and an empty table. She knew the ring would bring somewhere between $150 and $200. She knew that was 3 weeks of groceries if she was careful, which she always was, which meant it was enough to make it to the end of November. And after November, she would figure out December. Raymond picked up the ring and turned it in the light. 18-karat gold, plain band, no stones, about 4 grams. Current gold price would put it at roughly $220. He would offer her $160, which was fair for a pawn shop in this zip code, and she would probably take it without negotiating because she had the look of someone who needed the money before noon. He had seen that look more times than he could count. He was about to open his mouth with the offer when he turned the ring one more time and saw the inscription on the inside. 3 words, stamped in that particular angular script that came from exactly one jeweler Raymond had ever known. It was Earl Hutchins' handwriting. Earl Hutchins had run a small jewelry shop on Broad Street for 31 years before arthritis took his hands, and his daughter convinced him to retire. His shop was a nail salon now. Raymond knew this because he had walked past it 3 years ago and stood in front of the plate glass window for longer than he should have, thinking about how a man's whole life of work could become a nail salon without anyone marking the change. But Raymond knew Earl's hand because he had looked at it for years. The engraving inside the wedding ring he had given his own wife before the marriage became something they both decided to put down had been Earl's work. He had looked at those letters on the nights when the shop was quiet, and the quiet was the kind that asks questions. He knew the shape of every curve. The handwriting inside Dana's ring was Earl Hutchins' handwriting. Raymond set the ring down very carefully on the velvet tray. He looked at Dina again. She was still watching the ring, not him, her hands folded on the counter, her coat thin for November, her eyes patient in the way that people's eyes go patient when patience is the only currency they have left. She had cheekbones he recognized, not from anywhere he could immediately name, but from the general register of a face that had been through something and come through it without breaking. A particular quality of stillness. He had seen it in one other face in his life, a face that was connected to a chapter he had closed 14 years ago and had not opened since. He cleared his throat. She finally looked up at him, and when her eyes met his, they were brown and level and a little tired, and they were the eyes of his niece's daughter. He did not say it out loud. You do not say a thing like that out loud until you are certain. But the math was assembling itself in the back of his mind with the same quiet efficiency it always used when he was working through a hard valuation. And the math said this. His brother Darren had married a woman named Paulette in the late 90s. They had a daughter named Nadine. Raymond had not spoken to Darren in over a decade because of a disagreement about their mother's estate that had hardened over the years into permanent silence, the way those things do in families when neither side can find a way to be the first to move. He had not known Nadine had married. He had not known she had children. He had not known anything about any of them since the last time he sent a letter that came back unopened 8 years ago. Raymond looked at the ring, then at the face of the woman on the other side of his glass counter, and he thought, Earl Hutchins made one ring with that inscription for my family. And I am looking at someone who is my family, and she is here to sell the last thing she owns. He still did not know for certain. He needed to be certain. Ma'am, he said, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know it's not something I ask everybody. Dina looked at him. She waited. Where did this ring come from? He asked. Who gave it to you? She was quiet for a moment. He could see her deciding whether the question was safe, the way people decide things when they have spent enough time needing to be careful. Then she said, My husband. He bought it from a jeweler years ago. I don't know which one. Raymond nodded slowly. He turned the ring over again in his fingers, buying himself a second. He said, Do you know a man named Darren Cole? The change in her face was small, but it was there, a tightening around the eyes, the particular way a person's expression changes when a name they were not expecting arrives from an unexpected direction. She said, That was my grandfather's name. Raymond put both hands flat on the counter. He breathed out through his nose a long, steady breath. He said, Your grandfather. He passed, she said. Long time ago. Why are you asking me this? He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I need you to come sit down. I'm going to get you some water, and then I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay with me while I do. She did not move right away. She had the look of a woman who had been told to sit down before, and who had learned that sitting down was usually the front porch of bad news. Raymond saw that look, and he understood it completely. It's not bad news, he said. I don't think it's bad news at all. I think it might be the opposite. That was the part she could not have prepared for. Good news had not walked through her door in 8 months, and she had stopped leaving the door open for it. She looked at him for another second, reading his face the way she had learned to read everything, carefully and without rushing. Then she sat down. Raymond Cole was the younger brother of Darren Cole, who had been the father of Nadine Cole, who had married a man named James Carroll at 23 years old and had a daughter named Dina 3 years later, and who had died of a stroke at 44, the year before Dina's husband left, which meant Dana had lost both people who would have caught her in the same 12-month window with no overlap, no cushion, just one door closing, and then another. Raymond had not spoken to Darren in over a decade because of a disagreement about their mother's estate that both of them had been too proud to resolve, and by the time Raymond was ready to be the one who moved first, Darren was already gone. He had sent a letter after that to the last address he had for Nadine, and it came back. He had let the silence stay, the way you let a bad debt stay when there is no one left to settle it with. He had not known Nadine was gone. He had not known Dina existed. He had not known any of it, and now Darren's granddaughter was sitting on the other side of his counter in a coat that was not warm enough, trying to sell her wedding ring for grocery money. He knew all of this by the end of the first hour because Dina told him the same way she told him everything, without drama and without omission, just the facts in order. Her grandfather Darren, who she had only known through her mother's stories. Her mother Nadine, who had worked and scrimped and loved and died too young. Her own marriage to James Carroll, who had turned out to be a different person than the one she thought she had chosen, and who had left 8 months ago and been very thorough about it. The 3 children, the overnight shift, The mortgage that was technically current, but only because she had been doing things like not eating, which she said in the same tone she might use to describe a bus being late, without emphasis, without asking for anything. Raymond listened to all of it without interrupting. That was another thing he had learned in 26 years of this work. When someone is telling you the truth, you do not interrupt. He gave her the ring back. She tried to refuse it. That was the first thing she did, and Raymond would remember it for the rest of his life. The fact that even at that moment, even with the grocery list still running in her head and $4 and change in her purse, she tried to give it back. Her hand stayed flat on the counter, and she looked at him with those steady eyes and said, "I came here to sell it. I need the money, not the ring." "I know," he said, "but you're going to have both, and I need you to trust me for about 24 hours while I work out how." She looked at him for a long moment. She had not trusted anyone easily in 8 months, which was a reasonable response to the events of the last 8 months. But something in Raymond's face was familiar to her in a way she could not explain yet, and she had been her mother's daughter long enough to know that familiar was worth paying attention to. "One day," she said. It was not quite a question. "One day," he said. She picked up the ring and put it back in her pocket. Raymond Cole drove Dina Carroll to the store that afternoon. He told her it was the least he could do while he was working out the rest, and he meant it exactly as stated, without implication, without making her feel like anything was being given that had not been earned. He filled one cart and she filled a second, because he had asked what the children liked and she had told him, and he had listened carefully to every item, and by the time they were done, Marcus had his cereal, and Mia had the yogurt she liked, and Cora had the apple juice boxes that made her happy in the mornings. Dina carried Cora on her hip through the last 2 aisles because Cora had fallen asleep in the cart seat. Raymond pushed the cart. He did not say much. He did not need to. There are kinds of company that are mostly just presence, and Raymond understood how to provide that kind. In the car on the way back, Dina said, "You don't have to do any of this." Raymond kept his eyes on the road. He said, "Your grandmother and my mother were close when they were young, before families separate the way they do. You don't know that story because the separation happened before you were born. But I know it, and it matters." She looked out the window. The city moved past in the grey November light, storefronts and bare trees and people moving against the cold with their heads down. She said, "My mother never talked about her father's side much, and I think it was too complicated." "It was," Raymond said, "and that was my fault as much as anyone's. The argument was about money, the way those arguments always are, and we both held on longer than made sense." Dina said nothing. She'd learned young that the arguments adults had about money were rarely about money. Raymond said, "I'm not asking you to adopt a family you never had. I'm asking you to let me do what I should have done a long time ago, which is show up." She let that sit for a moment. Then she said, "Okay." It was a small word for a large thing, but Dina Carroll had always known that the large things came in small containers. That was what her mother had taught her without meaning to, just by the way she lived. But Dina Carroll had not survived the last 8 months by being a woman who let other people carry what she could carry herself. She had come through on the strength of showing up every night, laundering sheets and scrubs and surgical gowns in a fluorescent-lit industrial facility at 2 a.m, doing work that most of the city did not think about because it happened while they slept. She had learned to budget to the dollar on a phone spreadsheet she updated every Sunday night, organized by category, with 3 months of projections that she adjusted whenever the numbers moved. She had learned which grocery stores discounted produce on Tuesdays and Fridays. She had learned to make a pound of ground beef stretch across 3 separate meals without the children noticing it was being stretched, because noticing meant questions she was not ready to answer. She'd done all of this alone, and she had kept the fear out of her face because her children were 7 and 9 and 4, and they deserved to feel safe, even when safety was costing her everything she had. Raymond saw all of that. He had spent 26 years learning to read what people brought through his door, and people brought more than objects through that door. They brought their situations, their choices, the long arcs of how they had gotten to wherever they were standing when they finally walked in. He had gotten very good at reading those arcs in the space of a single transaction, and what he read in Dina Carroll was not a woman who needed to be rescued. He read a woman who needed one door opened, just one, and then she would handle everything on the other side of it herself. He happened to have a door. Raymond's pawn shops were the visible face of a larger financial services operation he had built over 18 years, quietly and without a press release, in neighborhoods that the major banks had been systematically leaving for decades. He ran loan products that were transparent about their terms. He ran a check cashing operation that charged less than the competition and explained the fee structure in plain language. He had a small investment account for employees who wanted it and could not afford a broker. The whole thing employed 41 people, and it generated enough to be stable without being the kind of thing that made you careless. He was proud of it in the way you are proud of something you built with your hands and your judgment, without luck carrying too much of the weight. His bookkeeper of 9 years, a woman named Vera, was retiring at the end of the month. She had done everything right and exactly on time for 9 years, and she was going to her daughter's house in Phoenix, and Raymond was happy for her and genuinely sorry to lose her. He had been posting the position for 3 weeks. He had interviewed 6 candidates. None of them had what he needed, which was not a credential but an understanding. The business existed to do something specific in a specific kind of community, and the books had to be kept by someone who understood what they were keeping and why, not just someone who could move numbers from one column to another. He did not offer Dana the position that afternoon. He was not a man who made decisions of consequence in grocery store parking lots. But the thought arrived and stayed with him through the rest of Tuesday and through all of Wednesday, while he made calls to 2 people who had known Darren Cole and might have known Nadine, trying to confirm what he already suspected was true. He got one confirmation by Wednesday afternoon from a woman named Bessie who had been his mother's friend and who remembered Nadine's wedding and who said, yes, Nadine had died, and yes, she had a daughter and the daughter was on her own now with 3 babies. And wasn't that something? And wasn't it a shame? And yes, wasn't it? On Thursday morning, he called Dina. I want to ask you something, he said, and I need you to know the answer can be no. It can be, let me think about it. It can be yes. There's no wrong answer, she said. What is it? He told her about Vera. He told her the position was bookkeeping across 4 locations, what the salary was, what the benefits were, what the schedule looked like. He told her he was not offering it out of obligation, he was offering an interview, and the interview would be the same as any other candidates, because he was not a man who confused fairness with charity. He said he had spent 2 days thinking about it, which was how long he took to think about decisions that mattered. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I don't have a degree. I know, he said. Tell me what you have. What she had was 8 months of tracking every dollar that moved through a household of 4 on a single income on a phone spreadsheet organised by category with 3 months of rolling projections, updated every Sunday. What she had was 10 years of watching her mother keep the books for a small home tailoring business by hand, because a professional accountant was a fixed cost Nadine could not rationalise, and helping with those books from the age of 14, which was when her mother decided she was old enough to learn the difference between a ledger that was honest with you and one that was just telling you what you wanted to hear. What she had was a mind that treated numbers as a kind of language. They had grammar, they had meaning, and if they were telling you something you did not want to hear, the answer was not to look away. She told Raymond all of this in the same calm, factual voice she used for everything. She did not sell it, she just said what was true and let it be what it was. He hired her. The interview was 40 minutes. He asked 12 questions about specific scenarios involving accounts and discrepancies, and how she would document and report each one. She answered 11 correctly on the first pass, and caught her error on the 12th before he could point it out. He hired her at 2.5 times her overnight rate, with benefits that included health coverage for herself and the 3 children, which she had not had since her husband's employer stopped covering the family the month he left. The job began December 1st, 3 weeks from Thursday. She would need to give 2 weeks' notice at the laundry facility and figure out the school pickup schedule, because the new hours were regular business hours, which was something she had not worked in 4 years. She sat very still at his desk after he told her the number. He watched her do the math in her head. He watched her check it against the mortgage, the utilities, the food, the children's needs, the various small costs that had been bleeding her for 8 months. He watched her face when the math came out the other side. Okay, she said. She said it the way you say something when you have been holding your breath for so long that breathing out feels like a risk. The ring stayed in her coat pocket through all of it. She had stopped thinking of it as something to sell. She had started thinking of it as the thing she had been willing to give up so her children could eat, and the fact that she had not had to give it up felt like a particular kind of grace that she did not yet have words for. She took it out sometimes in the evenings, after the children were in bed, and she held it in her palm without looking at the inscription, because the inscription still belonged to a chapter she was not ready to reopen. But the ring itself was different now. It was evidence of something. She just was not sure yet what it was evidence of. Mia caught her with it one evening, 4 days before the new job started. She had come to the kitchen for water and found her mother sitting at the table with the ring on the surface in front of her, not touching it, just looking. "Is that your wedding ring, Mama?" Mia asked. Dina looked at her daughter for a moment. Mia was 9, with her grandmother Nadine's particular cheekbones and a directness that had no filter, and never apologized for not having one. Dina said, "It was." "Are you going to sell it?" "No," Dana said. "I decided to keep it." "Because of the man at the pawn shop." Dina thought about how to explain it. She said, Partly because I went there to sell it so you three could eat, and you got to eat anyway, and I think that means it's supposed to stay with us." Mia considered this with the focused gravity she brought to anything that had more weight than it appeared to have. Then she said, in a tone of complete confidence, "I think great-great-uncle Raymond is nice." Dina laughed. It arrived before she could think about it. A real laugh, the chest-deep kind she had not had in so long. It felt like discovering something she had thought was lost. "He is," she said. "He really is." Mia got her water and went back to bed. Dina sat at the kitchen table for another 10 minutes, the ring on the table in front of her, the apartment quiet around her except for the sound of Cora breathing through the baby monitor she still kept, even though Cora was 4 now and past needing it. She was not thinking about the grocery list. She was not thinking about the math. She was thinking about her mother, Nadine, who had kept books for a business out of a kitchen, who had taught her that numbers told a story if you knew how to listen, who had died before she could see any of this, and who she missed every day with a specific, named weight that she carried the same way she carried everything else without setting it down. December 1st came on a Monday. Dana wore her interview clothes, the slacks and the dark blouse that she had ironed the night before, and she dropped Cora at daycare and Marcus and Mia at school, and walked into Raymond's office building on Haverford Avenue at 8:45 in the morning, which was 15 minutes early because she had always been 15 minutes early for things that mattered. Raymond's office manager, a brisk woman named Paula, who had worked there for 11 years, showed her to a desk that had been Vera's and was now hers, with a monitor and a keyboard and a stack of orientation materials that Vera had prepared before leaving, and a small handwritten note from Vera herself that said, "Welcome. Take your time. You'll get it," and was signed with just a V. Dina read the note twice, set it carefully in the top drawer, and got to work. What Raymond Cole found over the following months was that he had not simply replaced a departing bookkeeper. He had found someone who understood the specific grammar of what he was building, which was not just a business but an argument, that the tools of financial stability that the rest of the city took for granted could be made available in neighborhoods that had been systematically denied them, without exploiting the people who needed them, without making the terms confusing, without building your margin on someone else's desperation. This was a hard argument to make because the margins were genuinely thin and the administrative complexity was genuinely high, and keeping the books for an enterprise with this kind of mission required someone who understood both the numbers and the mission equally. Vera had understood the numbers. Dana understood both. She caught the vendor contract discrepancy 6 weeks in. It was a clause in a maintenance agreement for the security system across 2 locations that had been auto-renewing at a rate that had not been renegotiated since 2019. Not an error, not fraud, just an oversight that no one had looked at in 4 years because the automatic payment always cleared. She brought it to Raymond on a Wednesday morning with a printed summary of what the contract was costing versus what the current market rate was for comparable service, and a draft of the letter she thought should go to the vendor. He read the summary. He read the letter. He looked up at her. "How long did this take you?" he said. "About 2 hours," she said. "I was going through the service agreements and it stood out." He signed the letter. The new contract saved the company $11,200 annually. Raymond sent Vera a text to tell her, because Vera had always believed in doing a thorough job and would have wanted to know. By spring, Dana was in the Thursday planning meetings. She had not been formally invited to them. She had been brought in once in February to explain something about the quarterly projections, and she had explained it so clearly and asked a follow-up question at the end that was sharper than any question anyone else in the room had asked that day. And Raymond had said, from then on, that she should just come. She came. She was mostly quiet in those meetings because she was still learning the landscape of the business, and she did not talk until she knew what she was talking about. But when she talked, people wrote down what she said. There is a particular silence that belongs to people who have been told, by implication or by omission or by the plain arithmetic of how the world treats them, that their work does not quite matter. Dana had spent years in that silence. She had cleaned and laundered and budgeted and raised 3 children and managed a household on math that should not have added up, and never asked for anyone to notice. In the Thursday meeting in March, Raymond said, plainly and in front of 4 other people, that the company's financial reporting was cleaner and more useful than it had ever been, and that was because of the work Dina had done. He said it like a fact. She looked down at her notepad for a moment. She wrote something. Then she looked back up and said, I want to do the same thing with the loan portfolio reporting. I have an idea about how the current format buries the information you actually need. Raymond said, tell me. She told him. He nodded once and said, do it. She did it. The new reporting format went into effect in April. It was, by any reasonable measure, significantly better. Her children noticed the change in her, the way children notice everything that does not announce itself. Mia told Marcus that their mother was sleeping more, and Marcus said that was because the new job had regular hours instead of overnight ones. And Cora said their mother smiled at breakfast now, which was new. Cora was right. The overnight shift had not left much room for morning smiles. The new hours left room for everything the overnight had taken. Breakfast with the children, school drop-off, the particular quiet of a morning before the day began. Dina had not known how much she missed mornings until she had them back. She took Mia and Marcus and Cora to visit her mother's grave in the spring, the way she did every year in April when the weather broke. She brought flowers, the simple ones from the corner store, the ones Nadine had liked. She stood at the stone for a while with Cora on her hip, and Marcus leaning against her side, and Mia standing straight with her hands clasped in front of her, the way Mia stood when things were serious. Dina did not say anything out loud. She did not need to. She had a full, detailed account of everything that had happened since November, and the part of her that believed her mother was still paying attention somewhere had already delivered it. She just stood there in the April sun with her 3 children around her and let the quiet be enough. Raymond told her in October the following year that he wanted to talk about bringing her onto the management side of the business. He framed it carefully, because he had learned that Dina responded to conversations better than presentations, and that she needed to be able to ask questions in real time rather than receive information and be expected to respond to it immediately. They talked for 2 hours in his office on a Friday afternoon, after Paula had gone home and the building was quiet. Dana asked about the timeline and the scope and what the transition would look like for the people currently doing those functions, because she was not a person who thought about advancement without thinking about the whole picture. She asked which parts would require her to develop skills she did not currently have, and she was honest about which of those felt like reasonable growth and which felt genuinely uncertain. Raymond was honest back. He said the uncertain parts were exactly the parts he was counting on her to learn, because he was not trying to fill a role. He was trying to build something, and you couldn't build a thing with people who only operated inside what they already knew. She said yes at the end of the 2 hours. She said it simply, without ceremony, and then she sat quietly for a moment looking at the window and she said, I walked into your shop 11 months ago to sell a ring for grocery money. Raymond said, I know. I think about what would have happened if it had been somebody else's counter. Raymond said, it wasn't. She looked at him for a moment with those steady brown eyes. She said, no, it wasn't. She said it like a plain fact. And it was a plain fact, and it was also the kind of fact that carries everything else inside it, if you look at it long enough. The ring lives in her jewellery box now, in the top drawer of the dresser in the bedroom of the apartment she renewed her lease on for a second year in November, because the mortgage on the house was underwater and she made the decision to let it go and start something new and forward-facing, which was the first time in her life she had made a financial decision that was about the future rather than just about surviving the present. She does not wear the ring because it was from a marriage she has finished grieving, but she does not need to wear it. She knows what it is. It is the thing she was willing to give up when she had nothing else, the thing she carried for 11 days before she could walk through the door that would have ended it, the thing that turned out to be the beginning of something rather than the end of everything. Mia asked her once if she would ever get married again, the way children ask the questions that adults take years to approach sideways. Dina thought about it the way she thought about everything, seriously and without rushing to an answer. She said, maybe, if the person was worth it. Mia said, worth what? And Dina said, worth more than the ring. Cora is in first grade now, which means she has strong opinions about her backpack and her lunch and which colour cup belongs to her, and she announces all of them with a confidence that makes Dina smile every single morning. Marcus has a best friend named Oliver who comes over after school on Thursdays and stays for dinner because his own mother works late, and Dana sets a place for him every Thursday without being asked because that is who she is. That is who she has always been, and having a better job did not change it, it just gave it more room. Mia is in the school choir, and last spring she sang in a performance at the elementary school auditorium, and Dana sat in a seat near the front in the good coat she had bought in January. The warm one, the one that fit the weather, and she watched her daughter's face in the stage lights and let herself feel everything she had earned the right to feel. Raymond sat 2 seats to her left. He had driven himself. He had learned by then the particular shape of Dina's silences, the ones that meant she needed company, and the ones that meant she needed to be alone with something. And this one needed company without intrusion, so he sat 2 seats away and watched the stage and did not speak. At the intermission, Mia found them in the lobby and said, "Did you see me?" with the specific urgency of a 10-year-old who had just done something brave in public and was not yet sure whether she had survived it. Dana pulled her in close and said she had seen her every second, every note. Mia turned to Raymond and said, "Did you see me too?" And Raymond said yes, she had been the best one, which was not necessarily supported by the evidence, but was exactly the right thing to say. Mia received this with the composed dignity of someone who had suspected as much. The grocery list is gone. The 4 days without eating are more than a year in the past. The ring is in the drawer with the small things she keeps, her mother's watch, a photograph of Nadine Young, the birthday card Mia made her last year that Cora signed with a drawing of what might be a dog and might be a son. These are the things that hold weight. These are the ledger entries that matter. Kindness comes back. Not always in the shape you expected. Not always down the road you would have chosen, but the world keeps a longer memory than we give it credit for, and the thing you were willing to give up when you had nothing left is sometimes the exact thing that opens the door to everything you could not yet imagine having. Dina Carroll goes to work every morning now in a building with her name on the roster and a desk that belongs to her, doing work that is seen and valued and that she is genuinely proud of. She keeps one personal item on that desk, a photograph of her mother, Nadine, taken years before the stroke, standing in the kitchen of the apartment where the tailoring business ran out of the back room, holding a handwritten ledger in both hands and laughing at whoever was behind the camera. The ledger's spine is just legible at the edge of the frame. The handwriting on it is the same handwriting Dana uses when she signs her name. The first of every month she looks at that photograph before she opens her computer. She does not say anything out loud. She does not need to. Her mother already knows. If this story stayed with you, leave a word in the comments because there is something about the courage it takes to walk through a door when you have nothing left and everything to lose. And I think the people in this room understand that courage in a way that is worth saying out loud. And if you want more stories like this one, there is another one right here about a woman who gave everything she had for years without expecting a single thing back, and about what happened the day the world finally decided to pay its debt.